Why avoiding conflict is killing your freedom, Nietzsche. What if I told you that your desire to avoid conflict is slowly eroding your freedom? That every time you hold your tongue, every time you nod silently instead of voicing your truth, but every time you choose peace over confrontation, not because it's right, but because it's easy, you are surrendering a piece of your soul to comfort. And that comfort is the most subtle form of slavery there is. This isn't just about social interactions or workplace dynamics, but this is existential. It's about the trajectory of your life, your self-respect, and your very capacity to live as a free and authentic human being. Friedrich Nietzsche believed that conflict, especially internal conflict, was not only necessary but sacred. He saw struggle as the furnace in which the strongest versions of ourselves are forged. What does not kill me makes me stronger, he wrote, not as a motivational poster quote, but as a deeply existential truth. He wasn't talking about physical survival. He was talking about the soul's survival, whether you will become who you truly are, or whether you will decay under the weight of complacency. And yet, we live in a time when comfort is marketed as the highest good. Avoiding conflict is seen as maturity, diplomacy, even virtue. But is it really?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Let me ask you, when was the last time you had a difficult conversation you were terrified to start, but you did it anyway? And how did you feel afterward? Was it not liberating? Was there not a sense of power, of dignity, of self-alignment? That's not a coincidence. That's what Nietzsche called the will to power, not domination over others, but mastery over your own fears, your own instincts to hide. The will to power is not about being aggressive. It's about being authentic, no matter the cost. But here's the paradox. The more we avoid conflict, the more conflict we create. Only now it's hidden. It festers in silence. It becomes passive aggression, resentment, shame. The very peace we seek becomes a minefield of unspoken tensions. And worse, it turns us into strangers to ourselves. We begin crafting personas instead of living as persons. We perform instead of exist. We smile while we bleed internally. And all for what? To keep the waters calm. But calm waters can still drown you. Have you ever wondered why we instinctively flinch at conflict? Why we fear being disliked, judged, or isolated? It's because we've inherited a psychological legacy that equates belonging with safety. In the tribal past, to be exiled was death. But now, in modern society, exile is rarely physical, it's emotional. It's social, it's reputational, and so we shrink ourselves to fit the mold. We say yes when we mean no, and we say nothing when we should scream. We exile ourselves from our own truth just to stay in the room. Nietzsche would call this the morality of the herd, a system of values designed not to elevate the individual, but to tame them. We are taught that good people are agreeable, that harmony is always better than friction, that silence is golden. But what if silence is also cowardice? What if the very traits we are praised for, obedience, politeness, self-restraint, are the very tools of our own suppression? Think about your own life. What dreams have you suppressed because they might cause discomfort to those around you? What truths have you buried because they might disrupt the peace? What parts of yourself have you amputated to be accepted? And more importantly, what is the cost of that acceptance? Here's the brutal truth. Avoiding conflict doesn't make you more free. It makes you more dependent. You become reliant on others' approval to feel safe, and your inner compass rusts. Your voice weakens. You forget what you even believe. And slowly, imperceptibly, you become a ghost present in the room, but absent in spirit. Nietzsche didn't want us to become ghosts. He wanted us to become fire, not to burn others, but to burn away the illusions that keep us tame. He believed that only through confrontation, especially the confrontation with ourselves, could we become who we are. And that phrase, "become who you are," is not a contradiction. It's a calling. Because you are not born finished. You are born raw. And it is through struggle, through conflict, through the often brutal honesty of life that you carve yourself into something real. So when you avoid conflict, you're not just choosing peace. You're choosing stagnation. You're choosing to remain unformed. You're choosing to let fear be your sculptor instead of courage. And what kind of life can that build? Let me leave you with a question before we go deeper. What would your life look like if you spoke your truth every time, no matter how uncomfortable? Not recklessly, not cruelly, but honestly, unapologetically. What would you gain, and what would you lose? The myth of niceness, why your desire to be liked is making you powerless. We've been conditioned from an early age to believe that being liked is one of the highest social currencies we can possess. From childhood, we are rewarded for obedience, for being nice, for keeping the peace. Think about it, how many times were you told, "Be nice, don't argue, or just get along"? And so we internalize this idea that being agreeable is good, while being confrontational is bad. But Nietzsche would argue that this is a lie, a deeply embedded cultural lie designed to keep you tame, manageable, and small. Because the desire to be liked, when left unchecked, becomes a leash around your soul. It forces you to edit your truth, to dilute your essence, and to become a version of yourself that exists not for your own flourishing, but for the approval of others. Niceness is not the same as kindness. Kindness is rooted in strength, an intentional act of goodwill that comes from a place of internal abundance. Niceness, on the other hand, is often fear in disguise. It's the fear of rejection, the fear of conflict, the fear of being alone. You smile not because you feel joy, but because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't. You agree not because you believe, but because dissent might cost you your place in the group. Niceness is submission dressed as virtue. And here's the problem: you cannot build a free life on submission. Nietzsche saw this clearly. He saw how Western morality, especially in the wake of Christian values, had elevated meekness and humility to the highest virtues. But he didn't see this as progress, he saw it as decay. In On the Genealogy of Morality, he explores how the slave morality of the weak inverted the values of strength, excellence, and vitality. But instead of aspiring to greatness, people began to praise weakness. Instead of celebrating power, they demonized it. The result: a culture where the highest ideal was to be harmless. But what kind of ideal is that? Is harmlessness really a virtue, or is it just a lack of power? Let's be honest, the desire to be liked is not innocent. It is transactional. It is a psychological bargain we make with the world. If I don't threaten you, will you accept me? If I agree with you, will you protect me? But that kind of acceptance is conditional and fragile. The moment you deviate, the moment you assert yourself, the moment you say no, it's gone. And so you learn, slowly but surely, to abandon yourself in order to stay inside the circle. But what if the cost of staying inside is the loss of your own integrity? Here's the deeper danger. When you obsess over being liked, you become manipulable. You're no longer guided by your own values, but by the preferences and moods of others. You become a mirror, reflecting what others want to see, rather than a light shining from within. Mirrors are replaceable. They are dependent. They are fragile. But a light one that burns from truth and principle is unshakable. It doesn't ask for permission to shine. It just shines. Think about how this shows up in your life. How often do you say yes to things you don't want to do? How often do you avoid speaking your mind because you fear someone might be offended? How often do you dress, talk, behave, or even dream based on what others might think? Every one of those moments is a betrayal, small, invisible, but cumulative. Over time, they don't just change how others see you. They change how you see yourself. You begin to believe you are the mask. And the worst part, you start to fear what lies beneath it. Nietzsche believed that the path to freedom was paved with confrontation, not just with others, but with ourselves. We must confront our own cowardice, our own addiction to approval, our own quiet desperation to belong. Only by facing these internal shadows can we begin to reclaim our power. And part of that reclamation involves a radical shift. We must stop asking, "Do they like me?" and start asking, "Am I being true?" This doesn't mean we become reckless or cruel. Truth without compassion is brutality. But compassion without truth is manipulation. The goal is not to offend, it's to align. To live in such a way that your words, your actions, your very presence are rooted in authenticity, not performance. Because performance is exhausting. It burns your energy, your confidence, your spirit. But authenticity, even when it causes friction, is energizing. It reconnects you to your purpose. It reminds you that your life is yours, not a consensus project, not a popularity contest, but a singular, sacred journey. So ask yourself, what would you do differently if you didn't care whether people liked you? What would you say? How would you act? What kind of relationships would you build, ones based on truth or ones built on illusion? And most importantly, who would you become? Becoming the lion, why struggle is the only path to inner freedom. Nietzsche once described the evolution of the human spirit in 3 stages: the camel, the lion, and the child. The camel bears the burden of social expectations, religious duties, and inherited values. It says, "Thou shalt," and kneels. But at some point, the camel transforms into the lion. The lion is a creature of rebellion. It says, "I will." It roars against the commandments. It challenges the authority of the herd. This is not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It is the birth of inner sovereignty. But here's the part most people miss. The lion is not the final form. The lion is a necessary phase, one of sacred conflict. Only through the struggle of the lion can the spirit be reborn as the child of being a pure creation, of innocence and power fused. But you cannot skip the lion. You cannot bypass the struggle. And yet, so many of us try. We want the freedom of the child without the roar of the lion. We want authenticity without confrontation. We want meaning without resistance. But there is no shortcut. You must pass through the fire. And that fire is struggle, conflict with others, yes, but more importantly, conflict with yourself, your inherited beliefs, your unconscious fears, your unexamined habits. Because freedom isn't given. It's not a gift handed to you by society or earned through obedience. Real freedom is seized. It's wrestled from the jaws of your own internal resistance. Think about the times in your life when you truly grew. Were they moments of ease, or were they moments of crisis? Was it when everything made sense, or when everything fell apart? We grow, not despite struggle, but because of it. That's the secret. The very things we try to avoid, failure, rejection, criticism, discomfort, are the very things that forge us into powerful beings. Nietzsche didn't glorify suffering. He understood its necessity. He saw that human greatness emerges not from avoiding pain, but from integrating it, or from facing it with open eyes and clenched fists, not with passive acceptance, but with active transformation. But here's the modern tragedy. We've built a society that is allergic to struggle. Every inconvenience is labeled trauma. Every disagreement is toxic. Every demand for personal responsibility is seen as oppressive. We have become so fragile, so insulated, that we treat discomfort as a violation rather than an invitation. But what if your pain isn't trying to break you? What if it's trying to awaken you? What if the struggle you're facing is not a detour, but the path itself? Nietzsche's lion is not just a metaphor, it's a mirror. It reflects the part of you that is tired of pretending, tired of playing small, tired of carrying burdens that no longer serve you. The lion doesn't ask for permission to exist. It claims its space. It confronts the dragon of thou shalt, the internalized voice of society, religion, family, culture, and it says, no. I choose my path. That moment of confrontation is terrifying. But it's also sacred. Because in that moment, you stop being a reflection of others' expectations and begin to shape your own destiny. The lion stage is messy. It's filled with conflict, rebellion, and loneliness. You may lose people. You may lose comfort. You may even lose your sense of identity. But what you gain is something infinitely more valuable, the foundation of your freedom. And once you've roared, once you've stared into the abyss, and didn't blink, you begin to sense something new. A lightness, a creativity, a joy. This is the beginning of the child, the final stage of the spirit. But the child can only be born after the lion has cleared the rubble. So, let me ask you, what dragons are you still bowing to? What beliefs or fears still control you, not because they are true, but because they are familiar? And what would happen if, just once, you roared instead of whispered? Not to destroy, but to declare, I will. The price of peace, how avoiding conflict destroys your potential without you even noticing. There's a kind of peace that's more dangerous than war. It doesn't come with bombs or violence. It doesn't scream or explode. It whispers. It smiles. It offers you comfort. It says, don't make waves. Don't risk anything. Stay where it's safe. And slowly, it strangles your potential without ever alerting your awareness. This kind of peace is the peace of conformity, of avoidance, of spiritual sedation. It's the peace you feel when you keep your head down, when you nod even though you disagree, when you remain silent in rooms where your truth is dying to be spoken. And the cost of this peace, your unrealized self, your unlived life. Nietzsche understood this deeply. He knew that becoming who you are wasn't just about self-expression, it was about self-overcoming. And you can't overcome anything if you refuse to confront it. Conflict is the arena where the self is tested, refined, and reborn. Without it, you remain stagnant. You remain theoretical. You remain a draft of who you could be. And here's the terrifying part. The longer you avoid the necessary conflicts of your life, the more you begin to forget what you're even avoiding. You convince yourself that you're at peace. But it's not peace, it's paralysis. How many people do you know who have settled for jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, routines that numb them, all because the alternative would require too much friction, there's too much unknown, too much risk? They've made avoidance a lifestyle. But avoidance is like interest on a debt, it compounds. The longer you delay the confrontation, the heavier it becomes. What starts as a small discomfort eventually becomes a cage. And by the time you realize it, you've built an entire life around the avoidance of pain. A life that looks safe on the outside, but is hollow at its core. The irony is that true peace only comes on the other side of war, the inner war. The war against your own fear, your own compromises, your own smallness. Nietzsche didn't call for constant fighting with the world. He called for a battle with oneself, a sacred conflict, where the stakes are nothing less than your soul. He believed that your highest self is not something you simply discover, like a hidden treasure. It's something you create through discipline, courage, and relentless honesty. And that process is inherently conflictual. You must say no to who you were in order to become who you must be. But here's what they don't tell you. Conflict doesn't always mean chaos. It doesn't always mean yelling or burning bridges. Sometimes conflict is quiet. It's the moment you finally say, "This isn't working for me." It's walking away with dignity. It's setting boundaries not because you want to punish someone, but because you want to protect your integrity. It's choosing discomfort now over regret later. And yes, it's scary. But you know what's scarier? Waking up one day and realizing you've lived someone else's life, while your own potential gathered dust in the attic of your mind. Think about it. How much of your energy is spent managing other people's perceptions of you? How often do you catch yourself editing your truth, watering it down, softening your edges to keep the peace? And what if that peace is the very thing keeping you from your power? What if every conflict you've avoided was actually a doorway not to destruction, but to transformation? The truth is, freedom isn't free. It costs you your illusions. It demands courage. It demands conflict not with others for the sake of ego, but with the parts of yourself that prefer comfort over change. You cannot become who you really are and remain who you've been. Something has to die. And often it's the part of you that's addicted to being liked, safe, and unchallenged. So, I'll leave you with this. What would your life look like if you stopped avoiding every necessary conflict? If you faced the conversations you've been postponing, the decisions you've been delaying, the truths you've been denying? What if, instead of fearing conflict, you saw it as the sacred fire through which freedom is born? Because maybe Nietzsche was right. Maybe the greatest danger is not war, or pain, or failure. Maybe the greatest danger is peace, the kind of peace that keeps you asleep while your life quietly slips away. And if that's true, then the most revolutionary act you can commit is this: speak, act, confront, roar, live. Because your freedom is waiting, and it's on the other side of everything you're afraid to face.